So, what is friction to launch? Hey, I'm Jeff. Sorry for the delay. Actually, walking back from the coffee shop now. If you're new around here, I walk over to the coffee shop every day and I invite you to join me on the walk so that we can unpack some things. Talk about, really talk about things that are on my mind, to be honest with you. But oftentimes, this is an extension of a show that I host called Java with Jeff. That the original working title was My Morning Mindset. On Java with Jeff, we talk about the mindsets that are necessary for growth. And I started this live stream here on Substack to explain to the audience and to have more time to unpack some of these things. So, good morning, Nicole. So, we're doing that again today. And unfortunately, or fortunately, I mean, it wasn't a bad thing, but I get a call right as I was getting ready to walk out of the house. So, we're delayed by about half an hour now, and I'm walking home. So, you get to walk back perspective rather than the walkover perspective. Friction growth conversation I was having yesterday with my therapist, actually. This idea that with kids and parents, there's this inherent friction, part of the part of the growing process. Nicole says Substack has started. Time to find my dogs, leave the park, and go to work. Well, I hope you're not late on my account, as we're starting about half an hour late here. And thanks for joining. And hopefully you can hear okay. So those in the know, I had some real technology issues a week ago. Got a new phone. Ended up locking myself out of all of my devices for a few hours, or I figured it out. And then, of course, with this new phone, true to the Apple way, I can't plug my corded or whatever they call it earbuds into it. So I don't have the microphone dangling, and of course it's got cold again, so now my AirPods are underneath my cap. So I don't know what the audio is like here. Hopefully it's acceptable. Anyway, hopefully it'll warm up here in a week or two. I won't have to worry about it. Friction growth, as my therapist described it, is this natural tension that comes out of the growing process, the parenting process, that in short makes kids want to grow, makes kids want to go out on their own, essentially. I'm tired of living with mom and dad, or, tired of living at home, kind of thing. So they decide to get an apartment, or they decide to go to school, or whatever. It's the friction or the tension that drives them towards that decision. And as we were talking about this, or maybe later, as I was reflecting on the conversation, I started to think about this idea for the purposes of our conversations here. You may or may not have kids or dogs that you want to. Oh, thanks. Sounds good. Dogs that you may want to get to move out of the house, whatever. But what is it that gets us to want to grow? What is it that gets us up off the couch? It's motivation, right? That's that friction, that tension that we were talking about yesterday in the conversation about parents and kids. Eventually, creates, I guess, I don't know if that's the right word, but eventually creates motivation. It eventually motivates the kids to make a change. And it's like I said, like we talked about yesterday, it's part of the natural parenting and maturation process, etc. But when we take that to ourselves, first let's take it to ourselves. What is it that motivates us to make change, motivates us to grow? And it's got to be a lot of things. I mean, we've got a lot of things that stand in our way. Right? Earlier, I was talking about the messy middle as I started to do some more research on my curiosity about what keeps us from taking action. I started to learn about this idea, this term called by many the messy middle. Right? You become curious about something, you learn about it, you develop the belief that it can help you. Um, the belief becomes strong enough that you decide to take action. That action becomes part of your regular motion, develops momentum, drives change, leads to growth. Sounds pretty linear until you apply that to real life. And fear comes in, life comes in, financial obligations, relationship obligations, whatever all the things are that create this messiness in the middle that keep us from, my original thought was what keeps us from going from curiosity to action. But even once you take action, right, you have to keep, um, you have to keep doing the action, taking the action. You have to keep that action up. So it becomes part of the motion, the momentum, and even once it's part of the motion, how do you get to that flywheel effect? Right, that motion turns into momentum because we have to be able to keep pushing that rock until somehow we overcome the friction. If we want to talk in terms of physics, you have to be able to overcome the friction, which I guess is a different friction than the than the friction to launch. But there's all kinds of things that could stand in the way that could keep you from even getting to that point. So this messy middle is the reality of all things human existence, I guess. So I think we understand or can understand what keeps us from growing, no matter where you are on the path, on the journey. The things that stand in our way, the obstacles. But what about the other direction? Where does the motivation come from? Where, I don't know, I don't even think it's before curiosity necessarily, or it might be. I don't know. It doesn't seem to me like it's before curiosity. Like I can get curious about a lot of things. I can scroll. Maybe I lost my train of thought during Java with Jeff. I started talking about scrolling and I couldn't remember why. Maybe that's it, right? I can scroll and scroll and scroll and go, oh, that's interesting. That's interesting. That's interesting. And I might even get curious enough about some of the things. Like if I were to go to my Instagram right now and click, you've got to click like 15 things to get to your saved posts. But if I were to go to that effort and get to my 150 saved posts on Instagram, some of those I might have gotten so curious about that I started to explore them. I started to dig deeper into, well, how does that work? What does that mean? Those types of things. And that still doesn't mean, even though I've gotten curious about it, even though I've started to explore, even though I might start to believe that this would be beneficial or whatever's appropriate for the context, I still may never find the motivation to actually do it, to buy it, to cook it, to try it, to, whatever's appropriate for the context. So what does it take? There's something missing here. And I don't know if it's a thing. I don't know if it's an actual trigger or if it's five more steps. I'm not exactly sure what that is. That's why I wanted to unpack it, is thinking about it in terms of the friction to launch, in terms of the kids. And this discussion was not about my kids, but we got off on that topic. Um, you know, even in that context, theoretically, kids are going to go to college or military or maybe out on their own, except that seems even less likely today because of economics and whatever else. But go this way. But around the age of 18, right, they start to do these kind of things, start to think about these types of things. Some kids, not all kids. And that friction, just like the literal friction in physics. If you're rolling a marble across the counter, we know because of the laws of physics that marble's going to keep rolling. Even if the surface is perfectly level, there's no crumbs, there's no, whatever to act against it. There's no equal and opposite force. On most marbles on most countertops are going to roll quite a while because there's not a ton of friction. Countertop, pretty smooth surface. Marble, pretty smooth surface, even though it's got pretty high. What would the ratio be? Like size to mass ratio, whatever it is. It's going to roll because it's not a ton of friction there. So when we're talking about this in the context of kids, potentially years, probably years. Cole says sometimes it feels like trying to climb up a slide. Yep. We slip back down sometimes. But as a kid, the view at the top and the sense of pride was worth the climb. Yeah, that's really interesting because I think as a kid, like when you're at the bottom and you're looking up and you don't know what you don't know. You don't know what that climb is going to be like, which is also part of it, right? It's just part of the process. It's part of the reality. You're looking up. You don't know what you don't know. You don't know what it's going to be like. You start climbing. Yep, you slip. You slide back down. Eventually, hopefully, you get your footing, and you make it to the top. And you're right. There's that feeling of success. Which plays really well into the thing that we've been talking about for several days now from James Clear's email. And I haven't been here on Substack for a while for a number of reasons. But over the past week or so, talked a lot about one of the ideas from James Clear's email last week, which is the idea that repetition repetition is natural. We need repetitions. Coming from years and years in athletics and, you know, an athlete kid, a performing arts kid, as well as my own endeavors, we know that we need reps, right? In that context. If you ever did your times tables when you were a kid, got funny stories about those, but that was all repetitions. You need to put in the reps in order to learn, in order to get better, to practice, et cetera, et cetera. James Clear is talking about successful repetitions versus failed repetitions, maybe is the way you put it. Is talking about how successful repetitions build competency, but failed repetitions build character, or not character, confidence, basically overcoming that failure. Whether or not failure is the right word there, right? Overcoming the challenges, overcoming the obstacles. This is how we build resilience, right? So climbing up the slide and losing your footing and sliding back down, it's actually the act of starting again. Right? To me, that is the key. You could start climbing the slide, you could slip, and it might be a metal slide in the middle of the summer, or the middle of fall, I guess, if you're in Arizona. Huh? But the act of slipping, falling back down, and then starting to climb again, right? That's the overcoming. My problem, as I have mentioned a couple times, is the idea of calling it failure, right? If you started to climb and you lost your footing, you slid back down, but then you started to climb again, was that a failure, or are you just overcoming an obstacle? Semantics, maybe. Philosophy, sure. So it's either way. Either way, that's how we build confidence. We say, you know what? I slipped, fell down, started climbing again. I made it higher this time than I did last time. Remember that when you were a kid? Oh, I made it halfway up this time, or I made it almost to the top this time. And at some point, you started to accept that you were going to slip and fall back. It's part of the fun. It's like, oh, how high can you get? And you slide back, and then you try again. Sometimes it becomes a competition with your friends in the playground. How we build resilience, right? The kid that slipped and slid down and cried or whatever and decided never to try it again, they didn't build any resilience in that moment. So we know that we have to keep going. What motivates you to keep going? What motivates you to get back on the slide and go in the wrong direction on a hot metal slide in the middle of the summer? What motivates you to try again? Sometimes it is the friends standing around egging you on, the competition aspect of it, the healthy competition aspects of it. See that all the time, gym buddies, and for a lot of people, it's very hard to self-motivate at that level. You're starting to do things that going to the gym or whatever, whether it's a trainer or it's a gym buddy, workout partner, whatever it is. A lot of people that struggle with motivating themselves in those contexts. think it's kind of natural. Phil says kids tend to have the determination to keep trying again and again. I wonder if part of it is we haven't learned yet. Haven't had it beaten out of us yet. Oh, and it's when we're talking about slides, there's this aspect of it being fun. It's at recess, it's on the playground, it's whatever. So there's that piece of it. And a lot of adulting is not nearly that fun. I'm not sure I have found the equivalent of recess in adulting yet. Maybe, but a lot of people have sewers dug up. Anyway, I do wonder, and maybe it's going to take some more research. What is the equivalent of the motivation for the kid going up to slide when you're trying to? Well, I guess the original question is really back to what makes you even want to change, to grow. I guess that's the literal question. But when we take it to extend the conversation to the messy middle part of it, the motivation to keep going, because that's a big part of it, right? Is we can start, but we have to get all the way to the point, have to lean into that discomfort. I was talking about that earlier, about the yin yoga class I went to last night. It's like, you have to be so willing to lean into the discomfort. And if you go into Brandy's yin yoga class, she's going to tell you what the next position is, and the way she says it, and invite you to stay there for, she'll always assign a time, right? She's got the class planned out, but invite you to stay there for as long as 10 minutes. And you have to really want to lean into the discomfort to stay there for 10 minutes. Why? What gets us to the point where we are willing and able to do that? And, just like with yoga, that's a physical thing, certainly, but there's so much mental to it, and sometimes so much emotion to it. It's necessary to embrace and overcome. So, no answers today. Maybe just more questions. Maybe that's the analogy for life. All right, I made it home. I got my printer paper and ink cartridges off the porch, so I guess I better go in and do some work. All right, thanks for walking with me. See you tomorrow.